There have been moments of my life where I've been paralyzed from fear, anxiety, and stuck in all sorts of thoughts and negative emotions, and I bet you can resonate with this. But one thing I can tell you is that the more I start to understand my mind and really point down the biological mechanism that underlie my experience of whatever thought or unpleasant emotion, the quicker I've got to get out of these self-sabotage holes and negative moments. And what I really want to share in this video is that precisely understanding and keeping in mind the biological mechanisms, no matter if they're not precise, but just having that general idea of how our body and brain might actually be mechanically tricking us. I believe that if we can be aware of that in the experience, we can gain some awareness. And with that tiny awareness, we can do a lot of things. Just to give you an example, the other day I was walking down my house and for some reasons I could not identify. I was feeling tensed and angry and a tiny bit anxious. And just before I started getting sucked in into all this narrative that I constructed around my emotions, some ideas from the cognitive neuroscience book I've been reading for my exams came to my mind. And just like that, I started thinking of my anxiety as maybe just my amygdala, that tiny brain structure very fundamental for the fear and anxiety experience. I just started thinking of my amygdala maybe being a little bit overactive. Maybe I was just having an occasional rise in cortisol in my body and I was misinterpreting the whole thing. And my anger, well, my anger maybe was just my orbitofrontal cortex, another area in the brain that has been implicated in the emotion of anger. Well, I just thought about it being particularly excited, just as the amygdala. And just like that, with this tiny explanation, I started seeing my body and biological processes as separate from me. I can observe them, I can feel them, but that also means that I can detach myself from them. And by doing this biological reasoning, instead of getting wrapped up from these emotions for the entire day, I just spent a couple of moments with those feelings and they went away. The idea that our interpretation are so important for emotions have been long explored in psychology. Matter of fact, in the field we find the appraisal theories of emotion, which actually say that our emotions are nothing but our interpretation of the events. After all, you can imagine seeing two people having the same exact experience, yet go through a whole different set of emotions due to their interpretations. Just to give you an example, imagine finding yourself at your most disliked artist concert, which is maybe in a big arena, there's a lot of people, and the music is playing, the music that you must hate, cannot stand, cannot hear. And so you're there all pissed and oh, this music, how can it be? And just all around you, you see people screaming and wow, having a whole set of positive emotions. The same experience, a different interpretation, a whole different emotion. And in line with these appraisal theories, we find a very important emotion regulation strategy, which we can call cognitive reappraisal. Cognitive reappraisal briefly says that if we can give a new, different explanation and interpretation of whatever is going on around us, let it be a physical sensation, let it be an external circumstance, if we can see it under a different light and thus reappraise it, we can break free from the negative emotions that originated from the previous maladaptive interpretation. But this is very broad. This cognitive appraisal, you can see things through so many different lenses. You can think about your childhood and how that affects you at this moment. You can think about society and culture. But specifically in this video, I want to emphasize how biological based reappraisals can be such a powerful tool to reimagine our experience of life, to get past our negative emotions. Now, we don't need to be scientists for this, right? We don't need to have the precise knowledge about the brain structures and all the connections and pathways involved. I believe that just having a general idea is enough. And thanks to the advancement in science and the knowledge we accumulated in the just past centuries, we've been able to point down to some biological mechanisms underlying so many of our experiences of life. Going from the senses, we've been able to understand what vision is, what mechanisms, brain areas are involved in it. The same with touch and hearing, and we've also discovered emotions and the underpinnings of thoughts, right? For emotions, again, we know that the experience of anxiety and fear so much originates from this tiny almond shaped structure in the middle of the brain. And for thoughts, well, we know that thoughts at the end are just an ensemble of neurons firing together, creating neural pathways, and that the more we fire these neurons, the more we think certain thoughts, the bigger the pathways get. And the bigger the pathways get, the easier it is for our brain to just go over them automatically, which explains why. If you spend so much time overthinking about the same thing, it will just be so easy for your brain to go over and over and over the thought. There's nothing personal in it, it's just a biological mechanism, which maybe for another video we'll explore how it was actually adaptive for our survival, but I just really want to open your mind to this idea of thinking that your experience of life is so much based on these biological mechanisms. And if we can keep this in mind in the moment we're facing an horrible thought, in the moment we're trying to face a storm of negative emotions, that can be powerful. Now, with this said, I don't mean to reduce our incredibly complicated and fascinating experiences to just biological processes. Especially some emotions and thought patterns can be so deep and very ingrained in our nervous system that you cannot just say, oh, well, it's just all biology. I understand that. But I do believe that, especially in everyday life circumstances, and even in some ways in these bigger and more challenging conditions we might have, if we reappraise our emotions and thoughts through this biological perspective, that can be helpful. That can create some awareness, some separation from these same negative experiences. And if we don't add all these interpretations to it and make a whole story and identity around it, maybe it just flows. And with that, we can do magic. We can really do magic. I know it for myself, and I'm curious about you. Have you ever thought differently after some tough moments you were having? Maybe you were having an illness, you were having a challenge with your mental health. Has it ever happened to you that considering the biological or looking at the physiological mechanism behind it helped you process it? Now, I was trying to think of a name to give to this biological reappraisal or physiological reappraisal. And the thing is that, yeah, these terms don't sound so cool to me. So I'm asking you, do you believe we can find together a name that can represent this biological based reappraisal in a more fancy way? Maybe something that is not so scientific and this term biological, physiological. Can you think of something? And if so, if it happens, then while you have a shower later this evening or this morning, or whenever you're watching this video, you come up with a name, just leave it in the comments. I would love to see what you think and what we can come up with together. And finally, I challenge you. I challenge you and I invite you to, in the next, let's say, 24 hours, whenever you're having a negative emotion or maladaptive thought, try to remember what we talked about. Try to remember that you can maybe see it for a moment as just a transient biological process. Again, maybe your anxiety is just a spike in cortisol that might be normal and you're maybe misinterpreting it. Or maybe it's your amygdala being particularly overactive. And if you're angry, well, maybe it's just your orbitofrontal cortex. And if you maybe stick with this interpretation and just try to see it this way, you can separate yourself from it. You can stop creating a whole story and complicated narrative about why you're feeling angry, why you're feeling fearful, and what you should do about it, and just see it as a physiological process. Thank you for having watched this video. I really appreciate your support. I would love to hear what you think about these ideas, and of course, they can be controversial, but critics are welcome. I want to hear what you think about this. How you agree, disagree, how we could explore this idea further. And don't forget about the name. We need to find a cool term for this: biological reappraisal. Wish you a beautiful day, evening, night, lots of learning, and I'll see you to the next one. Thanks.